Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage General Wesley Clark of Renew America Together and Francis Townsend of Activision Blizzard.
Well, General, good to be here with you. Good to be back with you again.
Well, thanks, Fran. Good to see you, and I look forward to our conversation.
So I thought I'd start. You were an outspoken critic of the Iraq War, and you were very vocal, and I thought very articulate about January the 6th. What do we do? How do we improve our civil discourse? I know that you spend a lot of time thinking about it and working on it. Could you share with us your thoughts?
Look, American democracy, it runs on acceptance of norms of behavior. It's basically about trust. You have a culture. The culture is what the democracy grows out of. And what's happened is for one reason or another, we're losing our culture. We're losing it, and I'll talk about, why. I mean, we've lost it because there's a tremendous and growing inequality of income and wealth. It's the coastal elites versus the flyover country. It's the lack of education in civics. People keep telling me we need to reinstitute the draft. Now, they're putting people in a uniform and peeling potatoes doesn't make good citizens, but it does give people a common bond. And we have to find a way to replace what was the draft, I think, with something else. Somehow we've had 40 years, and I voted for Ronald Reagan twice, but we've had 40 years of let the private sector do it, and the public sector is not as efficient as the private sector. Well, what we always joked about in the military was anything worth doing is worth overdoing. Okay, we've done it for 40 years. We've overdone it. The private sector's done great. Lots of people made lots of money, and we should be paying taxes on it. But it's time to reinvest in the public good, the common good of America. Infrastructure, highways, ports, railroads, airports, new technologies. And so, it's a cycle. But we have to be careful because of social media, because of the so-called attack surfaces that are going on, we could lose so much of the common culture that holds America together that our democracy itself could falter. That's my concern.
I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things I believe we ought to look at, as opposed to the draft, pull us all together, is a mandatory period of national service. They do it in Israel for the military. It doesn't have to be military service. We've seen the impact of Teach America. Stan McChrystal has spoken a lot about this, and I'm a big believer that we have to have some common experience that helps to bind us. In places where we haven't been before, with people that we're not used to interacting with. And I think a mandatory one-year period of national service can do that, could certainly help be a beginning of that.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot, but I'll tell you, when I was running for office, Congressman Charlie Rangel from New York said, well, you need to come out for the reinstitution of the draft. Well, I couldn't quite do that. And anyone who does, when you have 18-year-olds about to vote, you'll certainly get the youth turnout up, and it won't be in your favor. So that's a tough lift. But I'll tell you, one of the things I've seen in doing work around the world is that it's not only that you need young people to harvest strawberries if you're not going to have immigrants come in, or pick pine bark beetles out of the trees in Colorado. You need 35 and 40-year-old accountants and lawyers to go and help countries that are developing and trying to put a legal system into place to come over and work. And so maybe, the advantage of drafting 35 and 40-year-olds is you don't have to buy them a bedroll and all that stuff. They can pay for it. Now, when I've run this by some of my friends, they weren't too enthusiastic. But Fran, I think the principle you're advocating is exactly right. We have to find a way to rebuild a common purpose for the country.
Be careful, General. A Republican and a Democrat agreeing on anything
Right.
is not popular these days. So, you were the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. We can't possibly have you here and not have me ask you, with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, how do you see that getting resolved, and what do you see as the biggest current threats?
Well, it's a real inflection point in the world. If Vladimir Putin gets away with unprovoked invasion and absorption of another country, and really the eradication of a country, which is what his announced intent is, the world as we've known it since 1945 will be entirely different. It'll be the end of the UN, the IMF, and so forth. Now, they're already in trouble. The UN's in trouble, even though it's meeting across town here. You know, the human rights doesn't exactly work. We can't get a condemnation of unprovoked aggression and so forth. But as President Biden has said, there is a sort of struggle of democracies against autocracies. And I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But the thing that's happening in Ukraine is that President Putin believed he could subvert Ukraine and reportedly paid $2 billion a year to his intelligence agencies to do it. Instead, the $2 billion, most of it apparently went into Dubai real estate. And I love the Palm Islands, but that's an excessive investment in the Palm Islands. And as a result, Ukraine wasn't subverted. And I think he's been shocked at the level of resistance. I think, honestly, he's like the frog that jumped into the pot of water that's on the stove. And he's being cooked, but he doesn't know how to get out of the pot. And he doesn't quite realize it's going to come to a boil. But it is, and he's losing.
So, you know, we talked in the first question about civil and civic discourse. I know that you and former Secretary Slater are working diligently through a nonprofit you formed. Why don't you tell us about that? I think it's very exciting, and I think it has the potential to have huge impact.
We call it Renew America Together, and I actually got Frank Luntz, the famous Republican pollster, to help me on this. He put the name together for me, and he comes and speaks to us every year. Look, the idea is that a democracy is no stronger than the voters, the citizens who are participating in the democracy. You can argue about the candidates. You'll always get some brilliant people up there running for office in any system. And you can argue about the structures, and there's multiple different structures. But at the foundation of it, it's the person who's voting. Can he or she sort through the issues, separate fact from fiction, emotion from real argumentation, and make the right decision for what advances the public interest and the private interest in the right balance? That's what we're really looking for. So what we decided to do was actually reach out to the mid-level community leaders, people who can influence their neighbors, but they're not going to know you. They've probably never been to New York to a Concordia conference. They don't know these really important people that are the news broadcasters or like CNN contract holders, you know. And so they get together and we match Democrats and Republicans and people who've never worked with an African American with people who've never worked with an Asian. And these people have a 6-month period of 1 day a month virtually. And then they have exercises. They get a psychological evaluation. Most of them have never been through mid-career education. They don't know what a Myers-Briggs indicator is, Myers-Briggs indicator. They're astonished when they find out that they're an I or an E and why they're always criticized for not talking or talking too much. And so it's a really illuminating experience, and it breaks the barriers that have been imposed on us through social media, through political advertising and other things. And I think it's a citizen education. And I think if we can do this and build an informed citizenry that understands that political parties are there to help formulate the issues, help groom candidates, and they have to differentiate themselves. But what pulls us together is much greater than what divides us. And that's what we're trying to embed and educate at the citizen level.
No, I think that's terrific. And look, there's been much discussion about reinstituting in even elementary schools and high schools civic education. I remember I had to take civics when I was in high school.
Sure.
But my children took history. They didn't really have a civics class. And you can't really fix it if you don't understand what the system is. So I think that's terrific.
Well, I just saw the polling that said that something like 30 or 40% of Americans can't name the 3 branches of government. And it's a little frightening to those of us who are, you know, lifelong students and supporters of democracy to find that there's so much distraction, there's so much static in the social media that they don't really focus on the things that will ultimately determine the courses of their lives. Now, Fran, I know you were the chairman of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. So what do you see as some of the threats that we have to deal with in democracy today.
So, General, I'll tell you, I think everybody, yourself included, you watched the events unfold on January 6th, and it was heartbreaking, frankly. I could never have imagined in all my years of fighting international terrorism that I'd be watching our own citizens assault the Capitol, threaten members of Congress. And I think that's emblematic. That's a huge problem, but that's not the problem. I think that's emblematic of the problem that you and I are really talking about in terms of civil discourse. Compromise has become a dirty word in Washington. It's as though somehow if you compromise, you're weak, as opposed to you compromise and you're trying to accomplish something. And so first and foremost, I worry that we have to find the things that bind us, to use your phrase, as opposed to there's lots of things that divide us. The two sort of other threats that come to mind for me, one is cyber, and I think people hear a lot about it. I can remember Leon Panetta saying he fears that we'll have to have a cyber Pearl Harbor before somebody pays attention. I do worry about that. There is huge capability in China, in Iran, North Korea, Russia. And I worry that we can't get enough attention, both in the public sector and private sector, until there's a Pearl Harbor or a 9/11. And then the third big threat I see is to our economy. I really believe that the country needs a national economic security center. We had a terrorist threat center. We created that after 9/11. I don't think we should wait. We find the Chinese, for example, investing in American companies through cutouts and shells. We have American investors in Chinese companies that are investing in lethal technologies that one day could be used against our military. That's got to stop. Senator Dan Sullivan's got a bill. And I think that we have to understand and ensure our economic health for the long term. We're clearly in an inflationary period and a recession. We hope that that's not prolonged. But I think we have to now, and this has got to be a public-private sector initiative.
I agree with all the things you're saying. But, I learned something from a friend of mine who grew up in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. He said, your president is so important to the world that every country wants to interfere in your elections. And the reason is because the American president, he gets elected on domestic issues, he or she, but they can't do much about it. But where they can make a huge difference is in foreign policy, and the American electorate doesn't even pay any attention to it. So are you concerned about the dark money influence and the fact that, foreign powers want to put money into our election system and sort of drive our policies in a certain way?
Well, I worry, I do. The short answer is yes. But I think the whole campaign finance laws have got to be relooked at.
Right.
Look, I think there's just too much money writ large, whether it's corporate funds, whether it's dark money, it's the super PACs. I think Americans want to know that their vote counts. And look, that brings up the subject of the Electoral College. I'd be interested to know your view. I can remember when my children were very little, my son had no idea. He was about 6 at the time and said to me, "What do you mean? They won the popular vote. What's this Electoral College thing?" And I think there's plenty of Americans who feel that way. So I'd be interested in your views here. I also worry about the influence. I think Russia, for example, has taken advantage of our freedom of speech by interfering on social media. How do we get a handle on that? How do we not censor ourselves, not sort of restrict our own speech, but we do deal with others who are trying to take advantage of our freedom?
Yes, we're going to have to learn how to deal with social media and still have a democracy. But, Xi Jinping told President Biden, I guess, that your democracy, it's an obsolete concept. It's not going to work. And if you look at China, and I've been to China so many times since my first trip in 1983, the progress is remarkable. And you can't argue against it. And if you look at America, and people would land at LaGuardia Airport and say, "My God, this is like a third world country." Now, it's not true today. But for a long time, it's been like that. And We have to have somehow, democracy has to work. That's the thing. If it doesn't do things for people, then maybe Xi Jinping's right. So I'm worried. You know, when my friend Newt Gingrich was running for president in 2008 or 2012, he wanted a 13,000 man colony on the moon. And I never could quite understand the purpose of that, but it was certainly a noble objective, I guess. But government has to do things that people need, and things that impact people's lives, not just individually, but collectively. My great example, and one of the people I admire most, is President Eisenhower and the interstate highway system. He had seen it in Germany after World War II, and he knew we needed it in the America. And the exact title of it is the Interstate and Defense Highway System. And he knew it was a national security issue. So you look at that, and it took 50 years to build it out, but it was a great dream. Now the question is, how do we pull the country together for a 21st century infrastructure? We need flying cars. We need better transportation. Maybe we need high-speed rail, maybe we don't. Maybe we need Hyperloop. But where do we go from here? Where are the big dreams, and how does government advance them? This is, of course, I'm a military guy, and I appreciate DARPA. But if you look at most of the technology we're using today, most of it originated from the government.
Yeah.
So I went to President Obama's jobs conference in 2009, and a lot of private sector CEOs were saying, well, we're not going to hire anybody. We're not going to do anything unless you get an answer for us on health care. Okay, I understand. That's the bottom line of the corporation. I went to the economists at Columbia afterwards and said, how do jobs get created in America? He says, well, one thing I'll tell you, he says, you can't do it with the government. He said, the French tried it. They put Brigitte Bardot on a perfume bottle, and it was a total flop. Yes, but we are doing it with the government in the defense sector, in the health sector. We are leading with the government. So it's just a matter of not changing much in America, but making sure people appreciate that it's not about get your cotton picking hands off my Social Security, but it's really about our government and using it for us. When you put the American people together, China has no hope, really, if we work together and understand what a wonderful country this is and what a great system we have. But I am concerned about the challenge, and I know you are.
Absolutely. And I think we've got a balance, right? Not having too much regulation that kills innovation, but encourages innovation. And again, the public and private sectors have got to leverage each other. So before we close up here, I'm going to ask you one last question. It's extraordinary. You have served under 8 commanders-in-chief, and you've seen sort of the principles of leadership that work and don't work. If you were asked by President Biden to give him advice about what leadership qualities are most important, what would you say?
Well, it varies from level to level. I think for the president, number one, it's communication. You've got to reach people. Number two, you've got to listen. And number three, you've got to make it yours and want to make it happen. One of the things that I was really impressed with one of the presidents, I'm not going to name him, okay? But he had a year left in office, and I happened to be with him, and he said, I've got so many ideas I want to get implemented. I've only got 1 year left, and I don't have time. I can't even sleep at night. I'm worried about them. I want a president who cares about the country and wants to get things done. As you say, it's a balance between the private sector and public sector. We know that markets are not self-regulating. We know that there are monopolistic tendencies. We know that big firms eat up little firms. I've seen it in the defense sector and many other sectors. But on the other hand, you also have to have scale, and you have to have the ability to mobilize talent and capital. So we got to get the balance right in this country. But Fran, I'm really encouraged. I'm here with you. I know you've been in Republican administrations. I've been in uniform, that's all. But I've seen all these different administrations. I've been in close to several of them. And I think, honestly, the future is ours if we just pull America together through organizations like this. And if we can then explain to others a little bit about how our system works. I want to close by just saying I was in with the president of Macedonia last week, and he's very concerned about the cost of energy. They're paying 75 cents a kilowatt hour in Macedonia, which is even more expensive than New York City. And he's worried about what happens in the American elections. So how we do with each other in America is not just about the Park Service, the National Park Service, new highways or whatever. It's the centerpiece of the whole world and global civilization. We just have to work together and make what we have more perfect, more equitable, more people involved in it, and more people believing in it. That's the key to America's future, in my view.
Amen. General,
Thank you.
thank you very much. It's been great
Thank
to
you
be
very
here
much,
with
Fran.
you.
Thank you.